Hey, everybody. Really fascinating chat for me, and I think a lot of you around the sales driven mindset, particularly within the C suite with a true expert in this field. Doug from CEO Sales Strategies, how are you?
Hey, Evan, good. Thanks for having me on here. I'm really grateful.
Well, I'm excited to chat. You've been at this business for many years and have some really unique and actionable insights. Before that, maybe introduce yourself and the journey you've been on at CEO Sales Strategies.
Well, I actually started this back when I was about age 5. So it's I grew up in Newburyport, Massachusetts, where I know you know that because we're from a similar area here. And I worked for my dad's business. And about the age of 6, we actually got pushed out in front of customers. He had an industrial machinery repair and sales company, and we actually sold at age 6. And I found it fascinating. Now they helped me, I mean, I had the employees and my family helped me do it, but I don't know if my dad did this because he wanted to teach us this, or if he just had really low cost labor because I was getting like 25 cents an hour, right? At that time. But long story short, I learned the power of leverage at that point
Mm.
because I remember looking at a part and saying, this costs $10. I just sold it for 20 and we made $10 and I work 40 hours a week and I get $10. So I did this in 8 minutes. So my little 6-year-old brain was like, something's a little better here if we can figure out how to create this in your own life. And so I did. And I started just kind of doing the entrepreneurial pursuit and having other people come in. My first one was a paper route. I hired all the kids in the neighborhood. My brothers, I wasn't old enough to get one. So my brothers said, yeah, sure, I'll go get one. And I did their paper route and I got my cut and everybody got paid. So that was my first sales management job, I guess. And then all the way through my life, I've built about 36 businesses, whether by myself or collectively with other people. And primarily the most of them have been, well, every business is a sales driven business, but
Mm.
most of them are focused in that area.
Well, it's a great story. It's amazing how so many innovators and entrepreneurs start at such a young age. It's definitely
Yeah.
something in the mindset and the brain. And fast forwarding to the C-suite, why is that such a beyond obvious revenue, meeting goals, meeting targets? Why is such a sales first mentality throughout not just the organization but the C-suite so important, particularly these days in a what could be a challenging
Well,
environment?
if it's not at the C-suite level, it's
Mm.
likely not to trickle through the organization. And the reality is that I feel, anyways, business is more competitive than ever before. And it's not this, trite, oh yeah, business is more competitive than ever. We're now no longer generally even competing just in our area. Of it, like let's say that
Mm.
we had a restaurant, for example, and we were like, hey, we're in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, and we've been in this business for 35 years. Well, guess what? There are other restaurants now that are, you always had competition, but now transportation's so easy. Technology so easy. I can order from wherever and people will deliver it to my house. So no matter what business we're in, whether it's a restaurant or a corporation of, high magnitude, there's no longer this, we're the only one thing. And the internet has flattened the world of transfer of information. And at this point, if it's not at the C suite level, then it's
Mm.
not likely to trickle down through the other parts of the organization. And every part of the organization should be a sales first mentality. And that
Mm.
means operations should be a sales first mentality. Customer service shouldn't be just about serving customers. It should be, how do we upsell, cross sell, or downsell this client, as well
Mm.
as take care of them on the back end. So all of this IT, you named it. You named
Mm.
the department or the division within the company. They all must be a sales mentality first, because business works very easily on a premise of money out, money in equals something. And if we're not bringing much more money in, then money's going out, then we have a negative at the end of that equal sign, and vice versa. So that's why it's so important.
Wow, it's a great point. Strategic alignment. And so, it sounds great. Of course, it's not easy to align sales teams, which tend to be the rogue folks doing their own thing with broader business objectives. So, any top line strategies for that alignment? What have you seen that works?
Well, with sales folks, I find it's actually not that hard to do because
Hmm,
it's usually what's going on is there's lack of accountability in the sales
hmm,
um, arena of the company, right? So we can look at our management, we can look at our executive management, and if they're not actively involved in that sales process and pushing the sales message and the sales message process through, it's not going to, it's like I spent 12 years in the military, Evan, and
No,
you
thank you.
know, oh, you're welcome. If I saw the general hanging out just having coffee, I wasn't really that worried about, being a corporal or a sergeant or whatever, right? I would do my job, but it wasn't like if they weren't driving leadership from the top, then the rest of the ranks will tend to follow that leadership. And it's just so important that they do that and having the accountability on top of that. So, for example, I went into a corporation and they wasn't a huge company, but they were doing about $50 million, and their sales manager was not really doing it. The owner wasn't really doing it, and they were in a decline. And they fell from
Hmm,
50 million to 48 million in 6 weeks, and they were in that kind of decline. Well, people there were starting to leave, even their good people, and they had a terrible, terrible retention rate of their people. Well, we went in and we just turned that around, and we then installed, training in with their sales team 4 days a week. And they were all like, what are you doing? Nobody trains 4 days a week. It's like, look, let's hold accountability to what your people are doing. Plus, by nature, people have a human need to want to grow. So let's teach them how to grow. Let's teach them how to make more money. Let's now, you as the CEO have to be actively involved in the push of this whole process. Long story short, we did. Within 2 years, they went from a $48 million company to a $110 million company with no other additional changes in like the product set or process that we were doing. But we got the troops to rally around the process, and they got so enthused, that they were just, out there killing it, and not literally, but out there killing it in the sales arena. And what happened? Operations started getting happier. What happened? Customer service was happier, right? Human resources, which, you know, some people would argue they're always happy, but the reality is they were happier. So the whole company started running much better because we had that accountability and that focus in that sales only first direction, as you're referring to.
fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about building elite sales teams. Everyone's seen those star elite performers in action, but
Yeah.
they're kind of a rarity. I mean, you have, your average salesperson out there. How do you replicate the success of those few elite salespeople to build an entire team of performance that it's not just based on a few outstanding individuals?
Yeah, and it's on the front end in most cases. So the thing is that there is natural talent that rises to the top, but there's also talent that rises to the top because they're just willing to work harder than anyone else,
Mm,
right? At it. So on the front end, we have to be really clear about what we're looking for as an elite performer. And that's where most people drop the ball. They never define what actually is an elite performer in this
mm,
company. They look at the person who's just blazing the trail of the, let's say there's a sales team of, I don't know, 10, right? There might be one or two that are just, lighting it up in the sales team. And people are like, wow, this is a unicorn. No, it's a human being who's doing something differently than everybody else
mm.
is. And so what is that person? What are the characteristics? What do we want that person to, on all the team level to be doing? Now, I also have I've been fortunate enough to literally hire, I don't know how many, I mean, certainly well over 1,000 salespeople in my
Wow.
career. So I have a bit of a bias on this, which is we get very descriptive on the front end of who we want. We run the ad that's targeting that particular, just as we would in marketing. What's our ideal client profile? What's our ideal right fit buyer, right? And we run the descriptors of the ad toward that person, and we'll attract more of those people. However, not everyone's going to be that elite performer. And a lot of people think that I'm going to get 100% of these people on my team. And the reality is, no, you're not. It's like every single professional team out there, you have a few people who will stand out better than others. I mean, you and I from Boston area, there's not much to talk about the Boston Bruins right now. Sorry, Bruins. But, but we do have some elite people who still stand out even in the games that we're continuously losing. And so those people are always going to perform under bad conditions, good conditions. It won't matter. It's just in their DNA to do so. So we have to make room for that. But what we can do, Evan, which I've done very successfully, is we can train the other bottom half or bottom 80% if they want to use the Pareto principle. Right. By the way, I've never found it to ever be 80-20. It's always different, but there's a smaller percentage that are usually doing that. And then the larger percentage is usually lower in their performance. We can take that bottom part and we can raise that up to past minimal acceptable standards. So that would be where I'd recommend people starting, because let's say that 20% of the team is carrying 80% of the revenue and 80% of the team is only carrying 20% of the revenue, to give Pareto, the credit. If we can take
Well,
that 80% of the team and we can now make that go from 20% of the revenue and get that to 50% of the revenue, then you're just going to jump your revenue, because the top performers are never, ever going to let the other people beat them. Right? If they're
right.
truly elite performers, they have an ego the size of Montana that says, if you don't, if you're not there all the time, then you're not who you are. And so those elite performers will continue to compete. Now, guess what happens when they compete and the bottom starts to compete? Firstly, you're going to spawn a few new elite performers out of that group. By the way, that's what happened with a $48 million company. Two of the bottom folks actually took hold, and now they had 6 people on the top that were high performers. These two outperformed the high performers. One of them outperformed the whole team of 6 that were on the high end.
Wow.
And so what ended up, because we trained them, we just like grilled and grilled and grilled and trained and trained and trained, and then held accountability. Like, don't show up tomorrow without your homework done from today. Right. And so what ended up happening was those elite performers were kind of kicked off their pedestal, and they really didn't know what to do at this point, because this one guy in particular was just blazing the trail. And in fact, he went from 140,000 in commissions when he started. Within 1 year, he was doing 2.1 million in commissions.
Wow.
And
Good deal.
so, yeah, it was great, right? For him and for everybody. And what happened was these elite performers who thought they had the company, like, the company can't fire us or whatever. They started seeing a bunch of the 80%ers starting to make their way up. So guess what they all did? They all came in line. There was no more arrogance on the top. They were like, yeah, we're going to do our job better. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And, it was humbling for them. And so I found training the bottom up is a really good thing, because you're going to find some of those superstar players that they're looking for in that bottom. It's just that they're not being taken, under their wing and moved to a new team, a new place or whatever. And you see this in sporting teams all the time.
Right.
Not everybody's Tom Brady. You can't go from the New England Patriots down to, to Florida and still continue to win. Not everybody will do that, but we will see a quarterback or a running back or whatever, player go from a team to a new team and now become the top star on that team. It's because we changed the environment and we gave them a different accountability process.
Great insight. Great analogy there. Let's talk about metrics that matter. Everyone wants to be data driven, of course, but what KPIs, what data should you follow to really gauge the health and potential of their sales organization? What do you think matters?
It's a great question. Everybody says they want to be metrics driven, but few actually follow it. So I've actually found that really 8 metrics really matter when it comes to the sales team itself, growing sales revenue. Now, to answer your question, it really depends on what the outcome is that the organization or even an individual selling wants, right? So, but I have found that these 8 metrics have served myself and clientele really well, and just measuring the ratios between these metrics and really optimizing these metrics, because a lot of the tactics that people talk about, like referrals, they fall
Mm,
into these categories of these
mm,
8 metrics. So the first is attempts, outbound, inbound attempts. In other words, i.e., we reached out to somebody to try to, prospect, or we have a lead coming in. We want to measure those. And you will find in most cases with your sales team members, they're not making enough outbound attempts,
mm,
right? So from attempt, the next one is connection. If we're making an attempt, are we actually connecting with the person? Why is that important? It tells us if the medium we're using or the media we're using actually works. you know, I like I talk to people sometimes and they're in the marketing space and they have this list of clients or whatever, and they're like, I talked to just one recently. I got 1.5 million people on my list. And I said to him, how active are they? And he said, well, they're active. I said, well, if you send something out, how many sales do you get? How many people show up? How many people respond to your
yeah, I have
post?
almost 700,000 followers. That and a cup of coffee will get for $5. So yeah, it's a fascinating
and,
analysis. Yeah.
and you can't buy a coffee for $5 at Starbucks. We know that, right? So I don't think, anyways. I'm not sure. But no, I agree with you 100%. Right? It's like you. So the connection rate will tell you something, and it will also tell you whether or not you're actually should be putting your money and efforts into these places. Because if you have no connection whatsoever with these people, it's not going to work. Right now, that one's a little more difficult to measure than many metrics, but it can be measured. Now, out of the connection, how many responses are coming back? And in particular, how many positive responses? So, salesperson reaches out, ghost town. There's no connection. Well,
Mm,
maybe the medium they're using is not right. Maybe they're cold calling, but they're calling on the wrong hours. Maybe they're calling to the wrong phone numbers, whatever. All these metrics will tell us a story, Evan, as you know. So from the response rate, now how many appointments are we setting? How many actual conversations are going to happen? Or, what is the meaningful dialogue that has to happen that's considered a conversation
mm,
or an appointment? From there, how many closes are we making? Because we can measure. Let's say I just had a interesting thing that happened. Someone said 164 appointments and only 6 people showed up to the appointments. And I was like, my goodness, this is crazy. Right?
mm,
Well, turns out that they were talking to the wrong buyer. Right? They were talking to the director where they should have been talking to the CEO. The director was then taking it up the chain, hitting the next executive level, and they go, no, we don't need that. So they're like, man, we're not gonna, right? So how many conversions are we getting out of the actual appointments? And then from there, what increased transactional value or what transactional value are we getting? And then from there, how are we spawning repeat business? If we just follow those metrics alone, it tells us a story. Now there's sub metrics within, like on the appointment, what's the show ratio, the no show
mm.
ratio, right? Those type of things. But those 8 overall arching metrics, those are the ones that I use to measure most companies. And there's 3 or 4 other metrics we use too, but those are the primary ones.
Interesting. Let's talk about one of my favorite topics as a techie and geek is technology in sales and selling, sales management. There's a whole category that's emerged called sales tech, and
Yep.
it's just a massive market map of hundreds, maybe thousands of companies. But it's also super confusing. I mean, how do you, as a C-suite, leverage tech like AI, automation other sales tools effectively? Because there's a lot of tech that can kind of waste your time as well.
Well, the first thing is thank goodness there are people like you because people like me who even, I had a tech background, but I'm not the guy who's the most like, I want to sit and play with the tech. I want to be out in front of people
Mm,
talking, right? And having relationships.
mm.
So there are people like you who just make my life so much easier. So thank you. Right. And the reality is right now with the explosion of AI and all the new tech tools that are coming out, it's very confusing for people to understand what's this or that, or how's this work, or but to answer your question, firstly, if you're not exploring technology or sales tech today,
Mm,
you're going to be left in the dust
mm,
because there are technologies out there today that automate workflow that you're paying for in human manual labor, and your competitors are catching wind that you don't have to do that any longer. So your margins are going to be shrunken just because of tech. And we're automating workflows all the time. We're looking at what can we do that's a repetitive task and take it out of the human being, and it gets done every time, right? And so it doesn't matter if someone's sick, it still works, right? Um, Unless the technology burps, which could, right? So then again, that's a whole new conversation. What are we doing for backup technology, right? So as a person running a company today, if you are not deploying or actively looking to deploy what you do, Evan, right, on the technology side, then you're going to be behind. There's no question about it. You can improve your profitability. You don't actually have to cut head count in most cases to
mm,
do this. It's just you're making the head count much more productive than they
mm,
ever were, because they don't have to search for certain things. They don't have to think about certain things. Like, we're even doing a lot of testing right now with AI setters or AI, inbound. Like I
mm,
called Sirius satellite radio yesterday.
mm,
And the first thing that picks up is, "Hi, I'm Harmony. I'm the AI assistant for Sirius
mm,
satellite radio." And, Sirius, you did a good job, right? It wasn't like, "Oh, I don't want to talk to this thing," right? Because it's not a human being, because they're saying it's not a human being. And thank goodness, and appreciate that the integrity they're telling it is not. But I had a conversation with Harmony, and Harmony kept trying to upsell me, and I'm like, "Look, I need to talk to somebody because the vehicle that I have, I'm selling it, and I don't need Sirius in this vehicle anymore." And they finally got to a live person, but the conversation was so great that I wasn't like aggravated by the time I got to a human being. I was hoping that Harmony could actually solve my problem so I didn't have to sit on the line and wait for a human being. Right. So when you spin technology the right way, it's a very productive thing. So, you,
Yeah, and,
especially in
and
the
and
sales arena.
it amplifies work by 10x. I
Oh, yeah.
have an AI sales agent on LinkedIn that goes out as smartly and precisely identifies potential prospects and leads for me on LinkedIn while I sleep. And I
Yep.
wake up and I have 10 conversations to follow up on, and it required zero effort on my end.
Well,
So
you
this
had to
sort of
set
thing
it
is
up,
just
though.
incredible.
You
Right.
had
And
to
train
set it
it
up,
and
right?
and
So,
and configure it, and all these things take time, but the investment, the payback
no, it's
for sales
crazy.
tech is amazing. Let's switch gears a little bit to a less, data-driven topic, culture and talent development. The old joke is that strategy eats culture for breakfast, or culture eats strategy for breakfast. It also eats sales for breakfast. I mean, we've all been in those environments where there's a culture that just nurtures selling and sales, a culture of
Yeah.
sales, and that increasingly is disappearing. I think with a lot of companies through downturns, downsizing, market uncertainty, not much investment in the sales team in many cases, I find. And how do you build that culture? Is it through the sales kickoffs and the award system and the team building exercises? I mean, particularly with younger hires who may be less experienced and less able to work completely independently, how do you develop the next generation of sales hunter killers?
Well, firstly, it's got to be on the leadership level.
Hmm.
If the company is not focused on that, um, it's going to be harder to do because the accountability to the actual clear mission of the company is off, right? And I'll pick on Disney for a moment.
Mm.
Um, you know, when my kids were little, I used to take them down to Disney. We'd spend $1,000, $2,000 in a day or two at Disney, and we had a great time. You'd come out of the parking lot, and then you go out onto the little trolley ride down in Florida. And from the trolley ride, somebody would greet you, and they were always happy and helpful to see you. And they're like, "Would you like to take the monorail? Would you like to go across on the boat?" And they would really. It was great. I went there 2 years ago, and my daughters are in their 20s now. And we get there, and parking, as usual, was insanely priced. So we paid that. We get on, and there's nobody to greet us to take us to the park, to take us on the little ride, right? And we're waiting there for like 10, 12 minutes. And we're like, what's going on? Anyways, they finally come by, they bring us in, and they go, walk to the park. we, we don't have the boat. We don't have the monorail. And if you have the monorail, we don't even know if it's running on time. I mean, it was just a totally different experience. And when you got in, we went to Epcot actually as well. And when we got into Epcot, it was like people don't even speak the language of like if you walked into like Japan or Mexico, they're not speaking in Spanish. Or they're
Right.
speaking in Japan, right? You can't even communicate with them in the native language because some of them can't speak it or they wouldn't speak it, right? It was just a very different thing. Well, you know what? We spent like 2/3 of a day there and we're like, let's get out of here. So normally where I spend $1,000, $2,000 a day at Disney, I spent like $300, $400 and I got out of there. Now I'm saying this story not because I want to beat up on Disney. I'm telling the story because if the attitude from the top down is not being managed, that we are a sales driven organization. And make no mistake, folks, Disney, it used to be one of the most hyper focused sales driven organizations on the planet,
Mm.
right? They've got things set up, Evan. Like you walk into a place, you don't get dumped back out on the main road. No, 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 no. Right? If you just saw this thing about Goofy, they bring you right through the place, just like a casino does. So you end up at the slot machine, but your kids are like, I need the Goofy button. I need the Goofy this. I need that. Right? And so it's done by, I believe, by design, and it's masterful. And so, but that magic isn't there based on what I saw because I don't see the accountability. So, firstly, if you want to change the culture, it has to start. I don't know Walt Disney. I never met the man. I imagine he was a very culture driven person and certainly a sales genius. And so, if we look at any company that has that type of play, that's a good one to model from the years past. But if it's not there at the top, it's hard to push it through in the mid. And so that would be the first place I would start. But let's say it is at the top and you want to push it through the mid. It's about accountability and training and accountability over and over. Think US military,
Mm.
right? And, I'm telling you, when I was in the military, they had a manual for everything, how to brush your teeth, literally. And so, and they would train you on this because they didn't want a soldier out in the field with a toothache, right?
That's amazing story. And I wasn't in the military, but I did go through in sales for decades, many, many, many weeks of sales training. It seems that's disappeared.
Yeah.
That traditional week-long sales training, you go away, you come back completely equipped and trained and directed. Um, is there sort of a dumbing down of the sales process and the sales force that needs to be addressed?
You know, somebody are going to yell at me for this one. I just think it's lazy application
Mm.
of, the principles, right? I mean, if we take any discipline on the planet, we know we're not experts at it in the beginning, no matter how good we are or how we were born, right? Tiger Woods used to be at the top of the golf game. He didn't start just one day grabbing a golf club, going out there and wham, whacking in holes, over and over and over again, and
Started at like
getting
5, like you.
exactly right. And so you build skill sets and you build this and you build that. And so unless the organization is going to take on that and teach people not just sales training, but how to grow revenue within the organization. And by the way, sales managers, that's your job. That's the only job you have, is to grow the revenue amongst the people that you actually manage. So that must mean if I got to grow the revenue, I've got to teach them how to grow the revenue, and I've got to hold accountability and help them grow the revenue. And I'm not picking on sales managers, people who are running divisions, that's your job, driving the revenue forth. And so if we don't hold that accountability to them, it's never going to happen. But yeah, I mean, coming in, bringing somebody in for, even on the old days, Evan, when they bring them in for 3, 4, 5 day sales training,
Mm.
that worked better than nothing. But I've
Mm.
seen people now get like, here's your online training manual. Go take a look at it. And it's like, okay, but I have questions, well, ask when you have them.
Yeah, I
Well,
remember one of the many weeks of sales training, they would video me in front of sitting at the desk in front of a customer,
yeah,
and actually play it back to you.
yeah.
And that was amazing. I was always sitting like laid back, I was like kind of relaxed, like chilling. And I looked at myself in horror, aghast at
Well,
how I was sitting in front of a customer, and little things that you never realize. So yeah, really, it's a lost art. I think the art
well, and
of selling.
you help people do this because the tech side now can look at a lot of this stuff and
Mm.
automatically evaluate it based on the criteria that we set up. I mean, you have video conferencing service. Like, by the
Mm.
way, folks, if you're not recording your phone calls today of your salespeople and
Oh,
analyzing
killer.
them, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, right? You can run them through simple frameworks like BANT or BANT, 2C or numerous frameworks, and in instance, like within a minute, you'll have this information back and you can use that to train people. And I do this all the time, Evan, with people, because like you said, they're like, oh, wow. And it's like, see, here in the beginning, when you're going, hi, Evan, how you doing today? Right.
Mm.
And you're making a cold call. What you're really saying to Evan there is, I'm making a cold call and Evan's going to be triggered on the other end from the word, how you doing today? Because that's what happened to you, or at least Evan, when he was in the middle of trying to get dinner and these telemarketers are calling upon, right? I mean, I still get calls like that today. And the first thing I was, how you doing today? And it's like, strike that from your thing because it'll improve your ratios. So there's like points that we can take out of the scripts that they're using and optimize that. And if we optimize 0.5% here, 0.25% here, 2% here, all of a sudden they're starting to close better because we've improved across the board 12%.
Yeah, I
And
love how granular you have to get to really be successful. So, just in wrap up here, what are you looking forward to the next few weeks, months? You're out and about? What's on your mind? What's up?
well, business wise, we're releasing. We have two master classes we're releasing,
Mm.
and one is on reliable, predictable revenue.
Mm.
It's how do you do it in especially the front end of the reliable, predictable revenue model, the metrics model that we deploy and work with. And the second one, frankly, is on follow up. We're teaching people how to do follow up. It is a complete lost revenue and profit thing that
Mm.
happens to companies. And we built this actually a SaaS product around this to
Oh,
actually
wow.
help people, on the personalized, meaningful, and relevant follow up. And how do you automate that process and make it so it's actually personalized, meaningful, and relevant to people, not just some autoresponder that comes out or some phone call that goes out, right? So those are the two next pushes that we're doing in the company. I've been fortunate enough to been asked by other companies to help them, and I'm working with the other companies, and we've been able to even get some ownership in those companies. So that's really when I'm 2025. That's my focus for 2025.
Brilliant. Well, sounds exciting. Can't wait to grab a coffee somewhere in one of our many beach towns. The great
Yeah,
thaw out here in New England has begun, so we'll see you out enjoying the weather. Take care, Doug. Thanks for all the insights and the chat.
Evan, thanks for having me on. I'm super grateful.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for listening and watching.